All right. This is the second installment of Sociology Saturday. And on this episode, I'm going to be talking about systemic racism. Now, before I do that, though, it's not quite 4 o'clock yet. Before I do that, though, systemic racism. Oh, let me stop that. Okay, I don't want that echo. So let me set this up so I can see if anyone pops in the chat. Yeah, so I don't expect many people to pop in, but I will be recording it and posting it. But let me just say a few words about myself. This is not the best day for me to be doing this. I'm having a problem with my eye. Like my eyeball is red. I thought it was like pink eye or something. It's just one. And it's sore, right? So I got this light here so that, I can have better lighting, and I'm looking at it and it's hurting this eye. There's nothing I can do about it. So that's one thing. Didn't shave. didn't cut my hair, and usually when I do a video, I try to look, pretty for the audience, but I didn't do it today. And also, I am slightly hungover, so I don't know. And then the Dodgers lost last night, right? So it's just all bad. It's just all bad. But anyway, I'm going to soldier on, and I hope that this time I do a little bit better. My first live stream, the volume wasn't so good, and it took me about 10 minutes. I was just like yammering on, and then finally someone came in and told me in the chat that they couldn't even hear me. So that was just 10 minutes wasted, really. So so now I hope that it's a little bit better. I think it is. I also have a better setup here, so I'll be able to show some images and talk through these things. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about systemic racism. That's the topic today, and I'm going to do it in a different way. If you go online, Google systemic racism, you'll get some awesome explainers. You'll even get people debunking it. Like, you'll get people talking about it, right? Like 2 or 3 years ago, this became a big deal outside of academia. It was always something we were talking about, at least I believe since the 1980s. But it became a big deal outside of academia maybe 3 years ago, and so people started doing all these explainers. So if you go to Google and say, what is systemic racism, you'll get that. I don't need to do that. So that's not exactly what this is about. I will, of course, give my own, bar napkin definition of systemic racism. But this is really about me as an academic, as a sociologist, describing how I would describe the history and the rationale behind systemic racism to students, right? So this is not about whether it's right or wrong. I'm not trying to debunk or not. I mean, I think that when you see, look, about halfway through this, you'll realize that this isn't something that even needs to be debunked. It's just a description of some social patterns. So it's not that kind of thing. It's just going to be more of a talk about, why systemic racism? What's going on here? So before I do that, though, I am going to show a 2-minute clip from Ben Shapiro. And let me get to that here. So this 2-minute clip is Ben Shapiro, he likes to destroy people, with his, fast talk. So this is, it's not even 2 minutes, it's 53 seconds. So it's pretty short. But this is enough because in those 53 seconds, he explains, or at least gives two talking points that conservatives use all the time. So after he does this, I'll then talk about what he gets wrong.
How can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, and when, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. You explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Okay, now for many people, they'll find that impressive. First, because he's talking a lot. And generally, when people ask a bunch of questions like that, obviously they don't want an answer. That they're just trying to show that, systemic racism can't explain, all of these different things. And he does that a lot. Explain to me this, explain to me that. In any case, he makes 2 points that I think are very common, not just with conservatives, but I think with people in general. So let me get to that slide here. All right. So these are the 2 arguments. Now I have here conservative counter arguments because they're primarily from conservatives, but I think this is across the political spectrum here. People have these 2 ideas. So Ben was asking all these questions. He said he thinks his black culture is the problem. Explain to me this. Explain to me that. Explain to me that. Why are they shooting each other? Why are they having kids out of wedlock? These standard conservative talking points. So is black culture the problem, right? That's one counter argument. A second one is that there is less racism today and black people are still behind. Okay, fine. Now I want to talk about both of those and give my own critique because this isn't something that is new, and sociologists already know that these kind of counter arguments are out there, and so we have to deal with them. But in dealing with them, it helps us get to why we need to talk about systemic racism. So the idea with culture, when people bring up culture, I always ask them a simple question. Where does culture come from? And they can't answer. So they want to say that, okay, it's black people's culture that's causing the black people being left behind, lower education rates, less prestigious jobs, more crime. This is all about culture. So where does culture come from? People cannot answer. That's because most people have a very impoverished view of culture. They don't know what it is, right? They think it's this static thing that people just randomly have and they pass it down to their kids in perpetuity, right? And that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes. Culture comes from structure. In fact, I think I even have that slide there. Nope, I don't. Okay, so I'll go back to this. Culture comes from structure. And what that means is people are responding to the world around them. And that's what generates the behaviors and patterns that you see. I like to tell myself and also my students that groups generally don't lie. Meaning that, okay, in any individual's household, you can be a genius, you can be a knucklehead, right? You can have psychological problems. There's a lot of individual variation at that level of the person. But groups are different. Groups are different. If you see that a group is consistently making the same choices, more or less, then you realize that the reason why they're making those choices is because they're witnessing or experiencing the same environment. Okay. So let's take something like black people's views of the police. Okay. Now, any survey will tell you that compared to white folks, black people have a less favorable view of the cops. Now, it's not 100%, obviously. You have a lot of black folks who, are very happy with the local police. They don't have any problems. But when you compare black and white, you see that black people do have a more critical view of law enforcement. All right? Why is that? What's going on? How did they generate this cultural view? Well, Black people, by and large, live in different neighborhoods than white folks, and those neighborhoods are policed differently. So, police, trying to do a good thing, mainly, they'll go into a neighborhood and they'll, set up shop, and, drive through the neighborhood, and, when you had stop and frisk in New York, and I think in other places as well, they would try to be a bit more aggressive with policing. That's a different relationship than what's going on in white neighborhoods or in rural areas where there are more whites than blacks. In those areas, police are, they're just not around. Now, you could say that, well, it's because of high crime rates and police go where the crime goes. Yeah, that's true. But that doesn't change the fact that black people are navigating a different law enforcement environment, again, by and large, than white people. So it's not that black people somehow just, we can't understand the police. I didn't know that we were supposed to, put our hands up and talk nice and say yes sir, no sir. It's more than that. Black people are not stupid. I mean, really, if white Americans were in the same policing environment as black Americans, they would make the same choices. I mean, really, culture is nothing but a response to structure. I can do the same thing with marriage and family, right? So right now what we're seeing in the United States is that there are more single parents than ever before. And the increase, if I'm not mistaken, is primarily clustered within the white population. Okay? Why is this? I believe it's because, the particular employment and income environment that white Americans have today is very similar to the employment and income environment that black Americans had for the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, where you had black women who were more likely to be gainfully employed and black men more likely to be non-employed or in jail. And so that's what you see with white Americans now. You have white females who are having careers and they're doing well, especially compared to white males. And so they say, well, do I need to stay in this marriage? Or do I even need to get married? This guy's a deadbeat, right? And so they make that choice. But what produces that choice, again, at the group level, is that the environment that they're navigating leads to that kind of choice. So culture comes from structure. So Ben's argument, I mean, he may be right that culture has something to do with these differences. Unfortunately, until you deal with the structural conditions that make that cultural choice necessary, you're never going to change it, right? So that's the first thing, is that culture changes, and it's also not static. So it's not the case that starting in the 1960s, black people learned some kind of social pathologies. They just no, we're not supposed to get married. They learn this, right? And then they pass that on to their kids. It's not exactly how culture works, right? The values and beliefs that we have change over time. So when you change the structure of society, the culture will also change. And before I move on from this, one of the things that bothers me is that people who make this cultural argument, somehow think that black people are stupid. Like somehow black people are just befuddled by capitalism, bamboozled by the law enforcement. It just makes no sense. Black people can figure things out just like white folks can. It's just that they're navigating different environments. And so that's what leads to culture. Okay, fine. So beat that horse into the ground. The second thing is there is less racism today and black people are still behind. So this is also a common conservative counter argument that, look, we had Martin Luther King. He did a I Had a Dream speech, and then after that, hey, we lifted these restrictions, which is all true. We lifted these restrictions and we changed our attitudes. No more formal segregation, no more Jim Crow. So look, there's less racism today. Black people are still behind, right? Okay. I would say that the reason why I'm sitting here today with a mild hangover and some red eye, but still sitting in a nice, cushy office here is because there is less racism. Yes, this is true. I wouldn't be here probably if there was the same racial climate as in 1965. What sociologists argue, though, is that the disparities we see are because there is still more to do. In other words, if there was even less racism, there would be even more of me in positions of authority. Now, whether or not you want that, that's different, right? But certainly that's the argument. So I just never understand that. There's less racism today, and that's supposed to mean something. I mean, really, what? Okay, suppose we find out that there is less domestic violence today than in 1960. Does that now mean that we can just close up shop and not even talk about it anymore? It's stupid, right? I don't understand that at all. So if there is some racism out there and you have a group of people who want to do something about it, great. It's a social ill. All right. So that's been, right? And, these two counter arguments appear all the time. And on the surface, they make a lot of sense until you dig deeper and you find out that, oh, no, there's some issues with this. All right. So let me now move into why systemic racism. Okay. And it sort of leads off of this idea that there's less racism today, but why are black people still behind? This type of thing. This question. Well, we want to answer that. Like, what the heck is going on? How come we're seeing a reproduction of racial inequality decade after decade after decade, even if the many gaps have narrowed, right? So before 1980, we were still focusing on the individual acts by bad people. That was where social science was, the Bull Connors of the world, right? The KKK people, So we were interested in prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes, all at the individual level. And we wanted to deal with that issue. So people were no longer bigoted, the Archie Bunkers, right? For those of you who don't know, Archie Bunker was a character in the 1970s in a show called All in the Family, and he was a classic bigot, right? He didn't like black people, didn't like the gays, this type of thing. So we're focused on dealing with Archie Bunkers. But we realized that those folks were, one, not around that much anymore, and they aren't. We're far less prejudiced today than we were in 1960, far less bigoted. Those folks are not around, but we're still seeing these disproportionate outcomes. Now, again, we know that it's not strictly culture. At least I tried to make that argument. What's going on in society that produces these group level outcomes? So then we started shifting, we being academics, sociologists mainly, we shifted to things like implicit bias, social patterns, and systems. Things that weren't so overt, but still we could document and measure, so it's not all theoretical, document and measure to show that these things created or reproduced the racial inequality that we see. So this was like the start of systemic racism here. It was born out of a need to explain the way things are. And quite frankly, we have evidence for this anyway. So what happened then? And I think this is actually an advance. A lot of folks don't think about social science, especially sociology, as being something that progresses over time. But we do accumulate knowledge and we understand things more. So back in 1950, yes, people were talking about law and policy then, but it wasn't to the same level of theoretical development and empirical precision that we have now, right? And so I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, we can do that now. I mean, we have statistical software that allows us to collect a lot of data and then crunch that data. We've also come up with ways of using audit studies and sending out resumes that, with the same name and sending them out and seeing what's going on. I mean, we do these kinds of things now. The implicit bias test that people love to debunk, which is fine with me. I mean, if you find that one test shows that is a bad test for implicit bias, cool. Right? It doesn't bother me at all. I know there's implicit bias because psychologists have clearly demonstrated that everyone stereotypes. So why in the world would it not be, we wouldn't racially stereotype? We do. In any case, so before 1980, individual acts by bad people, prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes. After 1980, implicit bias. So implicit bias, social patterns, and systems. Okay, so we've got a sort of historical progression here. So after we started accumulating all of this knowledge about these patterns in society that were not always easy to see unless you're actually looking for them, we realized that we needed to talk about system-wide forces, right? And so, I mean, just giving it a name is systemic racism. Okay, I don't know what that is. I don't even need that. Let me go back here. That's not what I want. Well, I don't know where it is. I wanted to get the definition of systemic racism, and it's not even here. Look at that. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So, let me give this definition. Okay, this is a standard bar napkin definition. You can get more dense ones elsewhere, but I think this works for me. Systemic racism is the thoughts of individuals, the patterns in our institutions, and the laws and policies that disadvantage people of color. This is a description of a system. I have to say that because I've seen people often say, well, you can't falsify systemic racism. You don't need to. You're describing a system. Can you falsify capitalism, right? I don't think you can, right? So it doesn't make sense. What you're doing, you're trying to shoehorn a sort of positivist understanding of hypothesis, null, and null hypothesis, and then proposed hypothesis, and gather data, and I've forgotten it. It's two hypotheses, null, and then I forgot the name for the one that you're proposing. In any case, you collect data and then you accept or reject the null hypothesis. Okay. So that's not what you do with systemic racism. You just don't, right? You are describing a system. So you start from this assumption that there are things out there that we may be able to find. You start from that assumption. And then you do research to see if you see any of those patterns or biases or laws and policies that then disadvantage people of color. That's what you do. And you do see it. You do. Let me see if I can find this slide. My slides are all out of whack here. It's conservative arguments, closing points. Like, what is this? What is this? What is this, Rod? What is this? This isn't what you need at all. Well, anyway, this is bad. I wanted to show a little bit more here, but it's not here. You know what? I have an idea. Let me see here what I can do. If I can find it on my screen. That's really weird that it's not here. No. That's too bad. That's too bad. I was counting on this to work. I'm not sure why it's not. Because I have a lot of slides here. Give me a second. Let me go to my desktop. Yeah, why is it not showing these slides? That's weird. I got the audit studies, got the dataclysm, I got the definition. Well, that's fine. So I don't want to do closing points. So let me go back. All right. Well, let me talk about some of these things that we know. I'll do it like that, and then I'll just kind of wing it. I had a list of ways that we see systemic racism, but I'll just have to kind of say them, I guess, right? So, but it's fine. So, we know that there is hiring discrimination because they do these resume studies where they send out the resumes where they just change the name, same resume, but they change the name. One is a black name, one's a white name, and then you send it out and you see whether or not the black resume gets callbacks at the same rate as the white resume. And consistently, we see that the black resume does not get those callbacks. And that's so consistent. I've seen people try and debunk this, but I mean, really, first off, we kind of know it. Like we kind of know that there's anti-black bias out there. We kind of know it, but, people don't want to actually kind of admit to it. So that's one. A second thing is lending or rental discrimination. And here I have, I actually saw this slide, if I can find it. Here. Yeah. So you can't read that. That's really small. That's really small. So let me see if I can blow it up here. All right. So let me read this. So this is about what we call paired studies. I call them audit studies, where you send out where you send out two groups of people who are the same in every way except race, and they give the same speech or they talk the same way to the rental agent, and then you see if the rental agents act differently towards the white and the black group. And look, this is from the Office of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. So I would think this is some pretty valid research here. Despite variation in methods, sample sizes, and locations, audit studies consistently find evidence of statistically significant discrimination against home seekers who belong to a historically disadvantaged racial or ethnic group. Consistently, right? The 2012 National Audit Study found, for example, that the share of audits in which a white homebuyer was shown more available houses than an equally qualified black homebuyer was 9 percentage points higher than the share in which the black homebuyer was shown more houses than his or her white counterpart. So white folks get shown houses more on average, 9 percentage points. That's worded in a very weird way, but okay. So I mean, there's evidence here. This is an example of systemic racism. My guess is that those rental agents are not prejudiced. They're not, and they probably don't even realize that they're doing it, right? But this is what Black Americans would have to deal with, right? So that's one example. Another one, and I actually have the picture for this one because I saw it. So I have to keep going through them. It was nice. I had this thing ordered so that it would show the slides exactly the way I wanted to, but that ain't happening. In any case, here is Dataclysm, right? This is a book by Christian Rudder. He was the co-founder of OkCupid, and he was working in, I guess, the data analytics part of that company. And so we collected a lot of data on dating. And what he did was he looked at the black daters, and what he did was he said, all right, let's equalize the white and black daters. In other words, he had a way of saying, okay, this black person is, without race, a 7. And this white person, without race, is also a 7. Okay, what happens then if we include race in that? Right? What he found was that there are many people out there who would, if the person was not black, would match with that person. And I don't know, it's not swipe left or swipe right with OkCupid, but it was something. It was some way of measuring that the person was interested in another person. So he said, look, we got these people who objectively should be about the same and should get the same amount of, not callbacks, but clicks or what have you. And we're not seeing that. If you're black, you get kind of docked for being black. And it was really bad for black women. So I can't recall, even though I have the book here, right? I actually have it here. I was gonna look through it before the live stream started, but I didn't get around to it. But just imagine that you had a black woman whose height, weight, age, maybe their education level, their political values, all these things would lend them to being considered attractive by a certain number of people if she wasn't black. And that's the deficit. That's like the black tax or something. That is another example of systemic racism. That's something that black Americans must face, right? So when you hear people talk about systemic racism and they try to come up with some, one data point to debunk it, there's nothing to debunk. It's just describing a system. It's incumbent upon the researcher, though, to go out into the real world and collect actual evidence showing that this is some form of systemic racism. And they do, right? The data is, there's so much out there. It's amazing. In a future live stream, I might go through some of this data, but it won't be the next one because I'm going to talk about something non-racial the next time. I don't want to do too much race stuff. Okay, so I guess I would like to do some closing points, right? Here's one, but I want to go someplace else. Okay, now I want to talk about this one. You'll often get people saying, if America is racist. I got some people in the chat. So I just noticed you here. So I'm gonna go through this this slide here, and then I'll get to your point. So thank you for asking the question. So first, you'll get someone saying, well, if America is systemically racist, then why do you have Asians doing so well, better than whites on average, when you lump all Asian groups together? Better than whites on average. There's a lot of variation within Asians, but if you put them all together. Or more pointedly, people with the same skin tone are coming here. You know, people of West African origin are coming here, Nigerians, Ghanaians, and doing well. So obviously, there's no systemic racism then, right? And I think that that's a good way to talk about the fact that every group does not experience systemic racism the same. So the systemic racism that I experienced was growing up in a residentially segregated area of the American South with no wealth or income on both sides of my family. I would like to believe that this wasn't because my mother and father were stupid, but because they grew up in the 1960s, and at that time in South Carolina, black people it was just very difficult for black people to cultivate their talents and do well. So they ended up getting factory jobs. They didn't get any wealth from their parents. So they were working these 9-to-5 jobs until Bill Clinton passed NAFTA, of course, and then my mom lost her job. But in any case, that is a different environment. That really is. Than the West African immigrant who comes here and often coming with wealth, often coming with a distinct plan to either go into some niche in the economy or to go to university. So they're not so sure. They might get some anti-black bias, but they're not going to experience racism the same. And I think people, when they make that comment about Asians or West African immigrants, they assume that racism is just this ambient thing that just presses down on all people of color the same, and that's just not what happens. So let me get to this question here. How would you explain the role that the civil rights, Black Power, and Black Studies movements have played in shaping the way that sociology has understood anti-black racism and white supremacy? That's a good question. That really is. Those are three different things. So I think with the civil rights movement, a lot of sociologists are interested in understanding how social movements work. So that's one thing. Black Power, I don't know. Black Studies movements, I'm not entirely sure actually how these three things actually lead to another, or lead to the conclusion. Has understood anti-black racism and white supremacy. I would say that there are scholars in those fields who help us understand those things, but I'm not entirely sure that the civil rights movement in and of itself, the Black Power movement in of itself, and Black Studies movement has helped us understand anti-black racism and white supremacy. I'm not entirely sure. I see critical race theory. That would be a good thing to talk about. So critical race theory may not have come out of Black Studies or Black Power movements, but that is a very interesting thing to talk about. So first, the second comment though, let me make sure that I get through these, because you're the only one here, so I might as well focus on you, right? So, considering the point that you're making now about the fact that not every group experienced racism, what do you make of efforts within the academy to center anti-black racism in our studies of racial domination? Ah, I see. I get the question now. Yeah, you know what? I think that it's important that we look at anti-black racism for two reasons. One, because it's the most virulent or the most pressing, maybe, type of racism. Meaning that, yeah, in certain times in American history, you've certainly had a lot of anti-Asian bias, especially on the West Coast, because it's always about group fear, right? So you had anti-Asian bias in California. You've had examples of Hispanics being mistreated, again, whenever there's like a group threat, right? So often in the Southwest. But it's anti-black racism that tends to power much of the racial decisions made by white Americans in the United States. So a focus on anti-black racism, one, is most pressing because it's that's causing a lot of the problems. And second, black people tend to get the brunt of most of the racism in the United States. I mean, still to this day, it's amazing. I mean, at this point, Hispanics as a group are a larger population than black Americans. But generally speaking, the dog whistles that we see in politics, I don't know, it seems like they're generally aimed at black Americans. So, I think it's important that we have anti-black studies on campus. But because racism sort of impacts people differently, we also need to study the experiences of other people of color. We can't just leave them out because anti-black racism is what I would consider to be the most pressing issue in the U.S. Oh, Rhode Island College. I had hair back then, brother. So let me keep going. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a group level phenomenon. Okay. Now I need to point this out because it's not necessarily productive, I think, to have this conversation in a sort of totalizing, America is racist, therefore this is going to happen to you. That's not the case. I mean, I'm here, right? And as far as I know, I've been treated quite well. So there's too much variation at the individual level to talk about this in terms of individual people. Yes, some black Americans face, they've been stopped by the cops and they've been mistreated by law enforcement. Maybe they're at a job and, they were kind of isolated and they didn't do as well as they could have, or maybe their boss was maybe anti-black, something of that nature. So these things all happen, but it's just hard to talk about at individual level. So this is all about group level patterns, It's also important to do that because individual people can do well. Like, you don't want to remove the agency from folks by talking about racism as if it's just this, totalizing, engulfing force that'll prevent you from doing anything, right? So this is a group level phenomenon. And I thought I had another slide, something about morality, but I don't have it. The next time I do this, so this is my second live stream. The first one was worse. So this is my second one, and I think it's okay. And here's the slide. This is a moral issue, right? I think that's important because a lot of people who are like, why are they always talking about systemic racism? What the heck is going on, right? Well, some people care about saving the whales, right? Some people care about, planting trees. Some people care about all these different causes. And for them, it's something that they really care about and they want to focus on. And they actually benefit us by focusing on that. I don't have any energy for that. I don't. I have a colleague who goes and, volunteers at the SPCA. This used to be his office, actually. And I don't have any energy for that. But boy, I'm glad he does it. Because I think it's wrong to mistreat animals, for people to have dogs and just leave them out on the street, or any kind of pet. So, it's a moral issue, systemic racism, and so a lot of people are interested in it and interested in dealing with it, and so it always bothers me when people, make these claims about, well, why are you talking about this all the time? Why are you talking about this all the time? Why not? If you're not interested, don't have that conversation. Go talk about something else, right? Go talk about making money or, whatever cause you're interested in. Focus on that. And let the folks who want to deal with systemic racism, let them do it. So, yeah, this live stream is a little better than the first one. My slides aren't the way that I'd like them to be. And hopefully the next time I have this next Saturday, my eye won't be so screwy. I don't know what that is. It's not the pink eye, but it's something strange. In any case, Sounds of Saint Elsewhere. I want to thank you for hanging out with me. There are 2 people watching now. So if there are no questions, I think I did a pretty good job with this, even if the slides were a little off. If there are no questions, I think I'm going to sign off. So thanks for watching.